I'm used to that. So let me jump into this. I'll tell you a couple things. First of all, I probably only know percent maybe at most of what this software can do. I use it for a very specific purpose, and that's what I'm going to show you today. I think it's really good at what it does, but it's kind of got a single function. What I do is I have spreadsheets like you're looking at here on the screen. Is there anybody that can't see my screen, first of all? Okay, so I have spreadsheets that I create. I download my data out of our CRM, and I figure out what zip code we're selling cars in. So I create a little spreadsheet with all the zip codes, the cars we've sold. I figure out things like, you know, what's a cumulative number here, and then when I'm targeting my SEM, I will go and generally target like the top 80% of the zip codes that we sell cars in. You know, you can't all of them because you don't have an unlimited budget. So this is an example of what I do. You go in here and it's going to be on the Insert tab, and I'll show you that in a second. What I sent you a link in the meeting invite was, if you have Excel 2013 or earlier, you need to download the software because it's an add-in to Excel 2013. But for 2016 and on, it's built right into Excel, so there's nothing to install. So the way I use this is to map out my sales, and I'll just give an example here. Let's say I'll grab these top 19 zip codes along with the sales number. One of the first things you need to kind of remember, and this I screw up all the time, and there's no way to know that you screwed up unless you realize your data's wrong, is your first row of your data has to be like a. So if you're going to map zip codes, you need to grab a cell that says zip or whatever you want to put there. Doesn't really matter, but this software will automatically grab the top row of your data and assume that they're headers. So it's always important to have a header up there. So I'm getting kind of some feedback on the line. Is everybody else getting that? Okay, maybe it's just my phone. So you grab the zip codes and the sold data from those zip codes, over to the Insert tab, and you go over here under 3D. What you also need to know is until 2016, Excel 2016, this was called Power Maps. So it's called 3D Maps. So you're going to see those two names interchangeably. And on the link that I emailed everybody, it's still called Power Maps because in 2013 that was the proper name. So,
hey guys, why don't we, maybe everybody can just mute their phone so we can kill that echo.
Yeah, I'm hearing my own voice, so I think somebody's got me on. If you could just mute your phone, then I won't hear my own voice. That's already a lot better. So you're going to click on 3D Maps here. Again, you click on Insert, click on 3D Maps. If you've already had 3D Maps created with this spreadsheet, there's going to be an option to add 3D Maps here, but right now I got a blank one to show you what it looks like. You click on this Open 3D Maps. At least on my computer, it always takes a while to open. Once you open, you get a map of, in my case, the United States. Oh, in this one, I already actually have some maps created. So I'll just create down here and do a new tour. For some reason, they call these things tours. And what it'll do is it'll show you a map of the United States. I generally X out of this so I can map out my screen. I don't honestly even know what it's used for. It never is all that useful to me. And then it shows you the zip codes that you've mapped. What it'll also do is it defaults to kind of a 3D map where the world is tilted. So I always just go like this and tilt it to make it a flat map. But if you want to be cool and do other styles, you can do maps that I'll show you in a little bit. So I flatten it just to make it simple for me to understand. And then you can zoom in and out with these buttons here. You can do the same thing with your wheel on your mouse. It defaults to putting squares where all the maps are. One of the things I like to do is always click up here on map labels so I can zoom in and I can see the cities and the highways and all that, so I know what I'm dealing with. It defaults to this chart over here. I always like to click on this one to show what they call the region. So now it actually shows the zip codes that I'm targeting. So now I have kind of a visual representation of what the map looks like for me, and you can drag the map around and make it look good. I'll get rid of this for the time being. One of the other things I like to do is this value over here. If you click on this, you can pick one of the two headings that was in your original Excel spreadsheet. It picks those up from here. The other thing it does is it puts this obnoxious warning in your file to tell you got a 3D map tour. But it's picking up these labels up here that you saw when I first started this. So what I do is I tell it the value that I want to build this map based on a coloring scheme is sold in my case, so the number of units sold. So what you see it does is it colors the zip codes based on the really dark colors is where you've sold the most, in this case 158. Some of the really light colors where you've sold the least, in this case 48. I also get rid of this because I don't really know what purpose that serves. So one of the things that I struggle with is I don't like looking at the colors of my zip codes that match any other colors on the screen. That's just me being the inattentive person that I am. So I click down here under layer options and I go over here under color and I immediately try and pick a color that doesn't match anything else on the screen. And usually this weird pinkish kind of red color doesn't match anything else on the screen, so you don't get any overlap with the blue matching the lakes or the yellow matching the roads or the purple matching the highways. And then the other thing you can do over here is slide this back and forth. You can maximize them all out as the same color scale, or you can make them as light as you want. Generally, about a third of the way over to this color scale works out pretty well for me because I still like to see the name of the cities through the lighter colors there. So I generally don't make that too dark. The other thing you can do here is work on the opacity. I don't generally lighten that up too much. I want to see the colors, but I still want to see the city names through it. Trying to go down the list here. There are some filters and stuff. I've never played with filters. The layer options, I just kind of showed you. These are the only ones I use right here. The other things that you can do once you have the data is you can have different styles of maps. To me, this is the most intuitive one. It's real simple. You can see where the zip codes are, what shape they are, what they look like, where they're located. You can see where you're selling more cars, where you're not. When you hover over them, you see the zip code and the sold number for every one that you've got in your spreadsheet. So before I get into kind of a little bit more of the fancier features, anybody have any questions they want to ask? Anything I might have glossed over that doesn't make as much sense? I'm here for questions if anybody's got them. Okay, I'll take that as a no. So one of your other options for the styles of maps that you can create is this, it's kind of like I call it like a heat map. I don't really know what you call this thing. I guess they call it a heat map too. So it just changes your zip codes to these little bubbles, and depending on how these bubbles are colored, you can tell that this is where you're selling most cars, and then this is where you're selling less cars. Again, you get the same thing here. You can change your colors depending on how you want them to look. I generally kind of leave them there. The radius of influence you can play with, but then they start all overlapping each other. If you want to make a typical heat map that you'd see for your website, you can drag it all the way to the right. As you drag it further to the left, you can see all the little bubbles get smaller. The only problem I have with this is you can't intuitively see what zip code you're in. And hovering over these bullets, they no longer tell you what zip code it is because it's not a zip code map. So I don't use this as much. It's cool looking, but it just doesn't tell me what I wanna see. And the same thing here, the opacity works the same way on all of these things. Another style is this one, where it just draws bubbles, and the size of the bubble determines how many cars you sold in a certain area. So we'll make it a little bit smaller. So, you know, we're selling 47 cars here, but we're selling 128 cars there. So If you just want bubbles over the zip code and you want to go by size of the bubbles, this is the one that you use up here, the one in the middle here. This one's the coolest looking one, but I find it very, very hard to use and read and understand. It draws these funky little towers, or I don't know what they call them, a clustered column. And it kind of looks cool because when you start shaping the world here and you're moving your world around a little, rotating, you kind of see this, and you can see the taller charts, obviously, or taller columns are where you're selling more of your cars, and the smaller columns are where you're selling less. This looks cool. It doesn't do a whole lot for me, but if you want something that visually looks pretty cool, this is definitely one of the ways to do it. So you have to move the axis of the world, or whatever you want to call it, to get these things to show up right. And then depending on, if you go too far, they start to get really hard. You can see which one's higher or lower, but you can't really see which geography they're attached to anymore. But this one does have the advantage of the zip code one, where you hover over them, you get your zip code and your number of cars sold, or whatever data you're mapping. This one, I have yet to ever figure out the difference here. They call this stacked columns, they call this cluster columns. I think what this one is if you have multiple data items, like if you want to go new cars sold and used cars sold into a certain zip code, it would draw these columns with multiple colors. So you might have the maroon as new cars, and it might be blue or whatever for used cars. So that looks kind of cool, but again, to me, this is just not as easy to understand and read, so I don't generally use it too much. So one of the other things that I do a lot, apparently I've messed up with the world here. Okay, we're back to north and south. Another thing that I do a lot is I go into Excel and I say, okay, that's what my map would look like if I wanted to target the top 51% of my sales, because this is the chunk that I grabbed here. If I say, okay, now what would it look like if I targeted the next 10% of my sales? So I want to target these down here. What I did was I created a separate column over here because, again, to remind you, and this is going to bug you if you forget, you got to have these column headers. Otherwise, it's going to assume that 48302 is your column header, and it won't map it anywhere on your map. So it's really important to remember to have column headers. So what I could do now is say, okay, I got another thing I want to map. I go back over here, and now, like I showed you, we originally opened it. Now we can add to existing 3D maps. So now I'm going to say I want to add it to the map I already have open. So unfortunately, they zoom back out again. We're going to zoom back in. We're going to change this to zip codes. We're going to go down here, and I'm just kind of redoing some of this to remind you the color scale. Open up, the opacity you're going to open up, and whatever. Let's make these purple. So we're going to add a value again. We're going to go by sold. I don't know why it does that, but it changed the color on me again. So now I've got a map that I can show my GMs, and we can visually talk about that says, if you want to target the top, I think it was 50% of my sales, we're going to do this stuff in maroon here. If you want to target 60% of your sales, it's the maroon plus the purple. Does that make sense? Anybody got any questions there?
No. Hey, Mark, the only question I have, this is Alex. So you said if we have an older version of Excel, we have to go find the plugin for it. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's in the meeting invite that you got.
Got it.
In the meeting invite, you go into that, open up the Outlook meeting or whatever calendar you use. I created a link in there to go to the Microsoft site to download the software.
Okay.
And it's just an add-on. It's not like a whole new version of Excel or anything. It's just an add-on. And if you install that, it'll automatically put it into your Excel. And then even if you're on an older version, when you click insert, you're going to see this 3D maps right here.
Okay, got it. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, so that's an important piece. Without that, if you're on an older version, you're not going to be able to accomplish anything. Any questions about this? One of the functions that I do is these layers up here is kind of important. To delete a whole layer, and they call it a layer, you can rename these layers like You can double click on that and I'll call it top 50% of my sales. And then I'll click on this one and I'll say, you know, 50 to 60% of sales. So I know what they are, because layer 1, layer 2 doesn't mean anything to me because I forget what happened 10 minutes ago. And then one of the things that's cool about these layers up here is you can rename them with this button here, this pencil icon. You can delete them with the X, obviously, but then you can hide them with these eyeballs. So if you have multiple layers, you can hide whatever layers you want. And what's important to remember, I'll show you an example here. How do I do this? Let me grab these. If you create a layer that's on top of another layer, like you're layering the same data again, I'll show you what that looks like. And that's where the hiding and unhiding these different layers is really important. Layer options, we'll make this green, and we'll show this. So now you can see that I've got 3 different layers, but we just lost our green layer because our green layer sits underneath one of our other layers. So depending on what order you show these layers, you can get all of your layers to show. Like, and I have to play around with it because it's not real easy and not intuitive how it works. But if you hide these layers in certain orders, you can get all of them to show up. So what, like the green layer sits on top of the purple layer. So if I hide the green layer, or I'm sorry, it sits on top of the red layer. So the red zip codes sit on top of that. So if you want to see the green layer, you just turn them back on again and you'll see all your layers. So you have to kind of play with it. To be honest with you, I don't know what order of hiding and unhiding the layers show. I just keep playing with it till I get all 3 of my layers to show. But that's kind of a cool feature if you want to see a certain subset of your data on top of another subset of your data. I'll go a little bit on the top here. I don't honestly use a lot of this stuff. I don't even know what a play tour means. I don't use capture screen because I have Snagit. If you go back in here, so let me pick an example here. Like this is 104 in 48307. If I go back over here and for some reason my 104, let's say I update some data and it's 222, when you go back over to your spreadsheet, it still says 104, but if you click refresh data, you'll see how this will probably get a lot darker. It'll take a while, but that shade of red should get a lot darker when it's done. I don't know why it's doing that. Yeah, it's freaking out on me. Okay, I don't know why that's not working. Well, normally when you hit refresh data, it'll suck in the new data and it'll redraw your map. So if you add zip codes or your sales changes or anything like that, it'll redraw the map. Now I have somehow, I don't know what I've done there, but I really confused it. Oh, okay, now it did it. I don't know why that took so long. But now you see it says 222. Now it's my highest sales zip code I've got. So this is what it should look like. It'll map all your data for you. This just flattens the map. It keeps you from, you know, revolving the map like you saw earlier. The map, you can change the angles of it like this. I think all this does is just flatten the map for you. So I guess you can still twist it. So obviously I don't use a lot of that. Another thing that I do use that is a little wonky in this software is to find a location. So I'll type in a zip code that I don't think is part of my current data set, and I click find, and it's a little weird, but it takes you to 48383, which happens to be where I live, but it doesn't highlight it. I don't really get how this works, to be honest with you. 48383 is right here, but it doesn't highlight it, so I'm not really positive what that does. It takes you to that part of the map, but for some reason it doesn't highlight the zip code, so I can't really tell you what that is. I've never used any of this other stuff. I guess you can create a text box, things like that, you know, you can move around, do whatever you want. I generally do that in Snagit, so I don't really have any reason to do it here. Legend gives you your different layers that you're looking at, but again, I don't see a whole lot of value in that. Field list. This is a little bit important, and I don't totally understand this, but this is the ranges of the zip codes that you're targeting. I usually really never pull anything from this zip list or this field list. What it's intended for is if you've got a whole bunch of fields, like you've got a zip code, you've got a city name, you got sales, you got new sales, you got used sales, all those will show up here, and you can drag and drop these into this area of the chart over here. I don't usually do that. It's complicated, but it does work. I've done it before, and I guess if you had a need for it, you can do that. Trying to think of the one other thing I was going to show you. Okay, yeah, the other thing I could show you is cities. So this is another one where I'll grab my headers again, and we'll do cities with the sold column there, and we'll create a new map, and again, a new tour. This one isn't as useful for me because it just puts dots where the cities are. And again, it's a little harder to visualize. Oh, the other problem I'll tell you that I can already see here is you've got to include a column over here with the state. I don't think we have anybody from Canada, so we don't have to worry about that, but you have to put a identifier for the state here. Otherwise, it does the best job of trying to guess at what city you're trying to reference, and that's why you get these cities in other countries and these weirdness showing up. But I'll just focus on the cities that did show up in Michigan. So same kind of thing, map labels, move it around. This, you can't click on the zip codes anymore because you're not doing zip codes, but you can do this. You can make them big. You can play around with all the things that we just talked about. It's the same kind of map we saw with the zip codes, but I struggle with this one a little bit. It's not as useful because I just look at this and I can't hover over it in this mode, and I don't know what city is even out here. You know, I could see Ray Townships out here and Waldenburg's here. I don't even know what city is there. So I'm getting close to my 40 minutes, so I guess that's my warning. Same thing here, if you just want bubbles. If you want to add the size, you have to click the sold button like I showed you earlier. So that's a way to map cities, but again, not as useful to me because I'm not always positive what city they're talking about. But if you hover over it, it'll give you the city name. But if you print this map for a GM or somebody, they won't really know what city that dot is hovered over. So that's pretty much about all I was going to go through. I think I covered all the things that I use it for, and I'm going to get kicked off my Zoom meeting in probably 5 minutes or so.